Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
I had asked for that song. It was written by a dear friend of mine, Faith Rivera, who has sung here at Unity before. And Faith had an experience of the book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, that inspired that song. And what a beautiful way for us to begin this series. I was hearing those, I've heard those lyrics for a lot of years and loved the song, but be willing to let go of everything I need to control. I don't think that lyric was in there before. I don't know. Does anybody else struggle with that? And the more chaotic the world becomes, the more my ego wants to control to keep me safe. Yeah. I think I'm good at it. I'm really not. That trying to control and manage conditions leaves me exhausted and brittle. But surrender into this life of God that I'm already a part of, then everything just opens up and we're free. And the outer conditions will be what they're going to be. And we do teach that as we begin to work in coherence and harmony with spiritual laws, we can reshape the conditions of our lives in a way that is more, it just matches who we are. And we can have a life of freedom and abundance and fulfillment, absolutely, but not by controlling things, but rather by surrendering into the power that is already here. You know, I use the word God to describe it or to name it, but I like what, I've been using this quote, I forgot. This actually comes from the road manager for AC/DC. I can't remember his name right now, but he says, God is just the blanket we throw over the mystery so we can have something to point at. Isn't that big for a road manager for AC/DC? I know. Pete Holmes, the stand-up comic, does a whole thing on that, and recently, actually I want to say this, John Price is a local Jungian therapist and wonderful musician himself. He's going to be with me on our stage here in September, along with Ken Gale. We're going to do a panel about that, but John has a podcast where he had Pete Holmes, this famous stand-up comedian, and the road manager for AC/DC, and they talked about the origin of that quote. Anyway, I'm off topic. Let me come back to, let me see what my iPad says I ought to be talking about. We end our staff meetings on Tuesday with a joke, and Christina Connor, longtime member and staff member here at our community, she's taken that on as her responsibility to serve us, and this is what she came up with this week. She found it, it's Crystal Lowry is the one who said this. According to a new report, adverse side effects occurred in over 3,000 people who used Botox last year, none of whom seemed surprised. I love that. The Power of Now. Let's talk about it. This wonderful book. 27 years ago is when Eckhart Tolle released this book. And he starts off the book in the introduction. He talks about his own journey, that up until he was in his 30s, his life was miserable. He was filled with anxiety and depression. And he found himself, he's Dutch, or is he German? German by birth, and he grew up there, but he was living in the UK, found himself in a park just at the depths of misery and was contemplating ending his own life. And he could see no point in any of it. And he had what I guess could be described as sort of a spontaneous awakening. And this is what he says happened. In quotes, I cannot live with myself any longer. This was the thought that kept repeating itself in my mind. Then suddenly I became aware of what a peculiar thought it was. Am I one or two? If I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me, the I and the self that I cannot live with. Maybe, I thought, only one of them is real. That's deep. The title for today's talk is the title of chapter 1 in The Power of Now of the book, You Are Not Your Mind. Is that news to you? If you've been around Unity or other traditions, we are a Christian church with a Hindu soul. I sometimes say we have a door open to the beautiful teachings of non-duality and oneness that come from the Eastern traditions. And this is where this idea has really been most taught, is that we have a mind, but we're not our mind. There is a deeper reality. But the mind is so good at doing what it does that it tricks us into thinking that's what we are, that I am my thoughts. There's another wonderful teaching which we practice and have had for classes here on it for years, is A Course in Miracles. And in one of the exercises from the workbook there, it says, I do not perceive my own best interest. And the exercise is to do this. When you're going through something that's really got you bothered, really struggling with it, just get still and see how many desired outcomes just kind of bubble up. I was at the end of a relationship, and I did that work, and I had about 6 or 7 things that I wanted to happen that were completely contradictory. I want to stay. I want to go. I want him to hurt. I want him to be well. I mean, it's like all of this stuff. It's like when I just paid attention, my mind was offering me a lot of different desires. And then the point of that work is that I don't know. I don't perceive my own best interest. I don't even know what of this is real. And the truth is, none of that was me. That was my mind. It was trying to control, trying to grasp at something that would make the pain go away. And we often push our pain outwards like that. That shadow projection thing, boy, do we see that in our world today. The scapegoating. We think we can blame ourselves out of our problems. That's the mind. That's what the mind does. It will recognize the pain that it itself is in and will seek some way to push it outward or to make it stop. Where it led poor Eckhart Tolle to the point where it's like, I'm just going to kill myself. I can't think of any other way forward. And then in a moment of grace, a moment of awakening, say, wait a minute, who's talking here? How many of me are there? Who is this one that says that it can't live with myself? What the Eastern mystics and teachers would talk about is developing witness consciousness. That we think about the clouds, think about white clouds crossing a blue sky, and each cloud is a thought. Now, we can be in that thought, and we can think that we're that, but what we truly are is we are the blue sky across which the white clouds pass. And how do we get in touch with that observer self, that witness consciousness? By being present. That's the whole point of meditation, which we teach, we practice, because it is the only way to let the mind just have a few minutes off. Take a 20-minute coffee break. Mind, I'm going to just be here and be present. And Eckhart so beautifully teaches in the book, not only are we going to be present, we're going to be presence, which is the ultimate reality. Presence is what we truly are. Now we have, as my friend Allie Benjamin says, we're taking God on a joyride by taking on a human body in human lifetime. God wants to say, what would it be like to be Michael Gott? Let's go find out. It's been quite a ride. I wouldn't say joyful all the way. But that's what we teach, is that we're one with God. We are God's own expressions, and that we're here to explore the universe from this perspective, from your perspective, and to learn and to grow and to find out all the ways in which we've been tricked into believing the illusion, the lie of human conditioning. There's great freedom in it. But we got to let go of everything that stands in the way of that truth to achieve spiritual freedom. From another passage in A Course in Miracles, Jesus says this, there is nothing about me that you cannot attain. I have nothing that does not come from God. The difference between us now is that I have nothing else. Do you feel that? The difference between all of the masters and saints is that they've just let go of the things that stand between themselves and divinity. While we are holding on, while we're grasping and controlling. You know, Mystical Manipulation is a book I'm going to write. I just think that would be, if I can just manipulate conditions using spiritual principles, get people to do what I want them to do using spiritual practices, I think I've got a bestseller on my hands. What do you think? That ain't the way it works. There's no teaching that says we control our way to God. We control our way to freedom. But many of the teachings, almost all of the traditions teach us that when we surrender and let go into grace is when we find our way to freedom and fulfillment. You are not your mind. You are also not your emotions, which in Eckhart's teaching, there's different ways of holding it. Some people say that our emotional nature, our feeling state is part of our soul. But for this teaching this month, we're going to talk about it the way Eckhart does, and that our emotions are part of our mind. And he says they're sort of concentrated thought energy, where we get a thought, we got some energy around it, and not only do we do we think that's what we are, but we are fully in it. Have you ever been taken over by your anger? Anybody? A few of you are still on the path. Not all of you are saints yet. Yeah. And when you get taken over by that strong emotion, you disappear. It's just you're that thing, you're that feeling. But as we begin to do this work, and believe me, it's work, and believe me, it takes time to unwind and to let go. I've talked about this, not particularly about the power of now, but about meditation. Man, I felt like the conditions of my life in my 20s and 30s, it was like it just had me like a ring through my nose, just pulling me around the world. I was always just out there with all this energy. And when I was driving in traffic or having a conversation with my boss, I was just all out here. And what meditation gave me was like a 3-second buffer, where before I reacted to the thing that just happened, I could just observe it and then have my reaction. But sometimes I wouldn't even have a reaction. I would just respond. Or, no, this was a miracle and this started happening, do nothing. It's amazing the miracles you will achieve in your life by stop doing something and start doing nothing for a little bit. It's incredible the change that made. Here's what Eckhart writes about emotions. If I can get to it, there we go. Oh, the question, I love also in the book, if you haven't read the book or if you haven't reread it, I really encourage you to get it, and I really encourage you to join a spirit group so you can go deeper in this beautiful teaching. And it's all questions and answers. I think they're actual questions that came to him in his teaching sessions, but at the beginning of every section, there's a question. Somebody asks, and the question in this one was, what about positive emotions? And this is what he writes. Love, joy, and peace are deep states of being, or rather, 3 aspects of the state of interconnectedness with being. As such, they have no opposites. This is because they arise from beyond the mind. Emotions, on the other hand, being a part of the dualistic mind, are subject to the law of opposites. This simply means that you cannot have good without bad. So in the unenlightened, mind-identified condition, what is sometimes wrongly called joy is usually short-lived pleasure. Pleasure is always derived from something outside of you, whereas joy arises from within. Isn't that beautiful? When we have what we would consider a difficult emotional experience, almost always it's because our mind has taken a hold of a thing that has happened, and we have a lot of feelings about it, a lot of judgment. It threatens us. It enrages us. Sometimes it can drive us to ecstasy for a minute. And believe me, we're not against pleasure. But we want it all to be a reflection of the deeper state of who we are. And so love and joy and peace are not things that are conditioned by reality. They're native states of who we are. And that is an important distinction. You are not your feelings either. But what do we do about fear? Has anybody noticed that the level of fear has increased in the world, at least, or is that my perception? It feels like there's a lot more, and people are, I think media companies are finding out that this sells a lot of advertising when they can just keep people in that fear and outrage cycle. It's not healthy for us. And yet, things happen in the world. We want to find out more information, so we tune in, and then they got us. Or is that just me? What I've learned about the political news cycle is if something big has happened, I need to find out information. I didn't watch the debate. I didn't. I knew that I didn't have the bandwidth for it. And several friends and some sitting in this room texted me, oh my God. And I was like, I'm not going to deal with this now. I'll research in the morning, I'll find out, I'll read the analysis, I'll watch video, I'll do all that, and I'll see if there's something for me to do right now. And guess what there was for me to do about it? Nothing. And so I could have, after a 12-hour workday, after our board meeting, come home and got myself worked into a lather of fear and upset. But I didn't. Or anger, or righteous indignation, or whatever, all those things that the brain could do. I didn't want to do any of that. I do a Friday live stream on Facebook at 12:30, and if you were on that on Friday, you're going to get a repeat here. There's one of my favorite Bible verses, comes from 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given unto us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. It's the same thing that Eckhart just wrote about in the chapter of the passage I just read. Power and love and sound mind, those are native states of our being, of our oneness with God. That's what we are. But sound mind, man, my mind makes a lot of sound. My mind is noisy. But another translation of sound mind in this passage in the Greek, the Koine Greek from the first century, is self-discipline. Self-discipline, self-control. We don't like that word control, but sometimes it's good to have that sense of sound mind, to be well, not to be chasing all the events that happen. And our fear drives us to do so many crazy things. 2 weeks ago, Howard was here, and my predecessor, Reverend Howard Caesar, and he shared that when he went to a dentist as a young man, and the doctor said, you need a root canal, and he had no idea what that meant, but it struck such fear in him. He's like, pull the tooth, and it was like, it ended up being a much, much worse condition, and he used that as a teaching for us to say that fear caused more pain. The fear just paralyzed him in that moment, and we've done that, our own version of that. When fear has gotten a hold of us, that we just lose our mind, and we follow the mind. We lose the sound mind of connection with God. Let the mind of Christ that was in Christ Jesus be also in you, as it's written in the Bible. We lose the Christ mind, and we go to the crazy monkey mind, the noisy mind. That's what fear does for us. I came across this week. I talked about St. Google as being one of the great resources for my work here on Sunday morning, giving you sermons. I also have now fallen in love with St. YouTube. And it's a beautiful, but here's why. I read a lot of books. I always have 6 or 7 spiritual books that I do as part of my morning practice. But I love to watch the authors. I like to watch them talk. I like to hear their cadence. I like to get a sense of and then I can hear that voice when I'm reading their words. And I don't even remember I do remember. It was about one of my favorite authors. It was the biographer of Henry Nouwen was giving a talk. And at the beginning of his message, he read this beautiful prayer from a Christian mystic, St. Teresa of Avila. So I just right now invite you just to let this take you over for a moment. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices. I'm going to read it again. Just as the rain just began outside here in Houston, just feel this wash over us. Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing away. God never changes. Patience obtains all things. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices. Isn't that a beautiful antidote for our fear, for our crazy mind that wants to take us in all of these different things? Well, have you tried this? Have you thought about this? Go do that. He's the problem. Go do that. It'll do all of that chatter that takes us out of what the truth is, that God's here. The life of God is living itself fully and freely as you and as me. There's nothing you have to go find. There's nothing you have to get good enough. It's not about following the rules or asking a Savior to save you from your sin. It's not about that. It's just here. It's present. And when we get in touch with that truth, the fear has no power over us. The rain is just, it comes and it goes and it passes. There were 3 sermons I wanted to give you today. That was the first one. Now we'll start number 2. No. I wanted to talk about the 4th of July and why we would have an American flag on our stage if we believe in the separation of church and state. And I want to talk about that. I wanted to continue to talk about this vision that has become so real for me about how Unity of Houston can become a welcoming island, a place of refuge and skill building for us to begin to rebuild the social fabric in our lives and in our circles as a part of the healing of humanity. I want to talk about that too. And I want to talk about this great book, The Power of Now. Let's talk about America for a second, shall we? There are a lot of churches that are nationalistic in the way that they do things. And they offer voter guides. Do you know about that? Where there's like, these are the people you vote for so that you're in line with our spiritual community and our teachings. We're never going to do that here, ever. We respect the wisdom of spirit within you to find your way, but we do encourage you to get registered and vote, because this is the way that we get to bring our values into the public sphere. Politics is about policy. It's the agreements we make on how we're going to live together as a city, as a county, as a state, as a nation, as a world. And it's important. But here's something I found. Thank you, St. Google. This may have been St. Facebook, now that I think about it. This is from a Christian pastor. His name is David Hansen. And he talks about the difference between patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is the love and affection for one's country stemming from the ideas and values of that country. Nationalism is the love and affection for one's country stemming from the belief in the superiority of one's own country. Patriotism views the nation as great insofar as it lives into its stated values. Nationalism views the nation as great regardless of whether it lives its values. Patriotism looks forward to the future as an opportunity to more completely live out our collective values. Nationalism looks to the past as a golden era and strives to return to it. In patriotism, criticism and protest are opportunities for improvement. In nationalism, criticism and protest are unacceptable and perhaps treasonous. Patriotism appreciates the good in other nations. Nationalism views other nations as threats and inferior. And lastly, patriotism can be a spiritual virtue insofar as the national ideals coincide with this one: love thy neighbor. Nationalism is idolatry. I'm a patriot. What are the values that America stands for? Equality, freedom, justice. When the Declaration of Independence was signed, when the colonial leaders decided that the old way of monarchy and taxation without representation is not just, and something new had to happen, I believe they brought forth a new possibility in the way we can live together. And it's not been perfect or easy, and it's still got lots of problems. Just a few lines down from the We Believe, all men are made, It's self-evident that all men are created equal. There's a line about the savage hordes of the Indians, is what it talked about. I can't remember the word. I blocked it from my mind. Savages, yeah, that was the word. They called them savages. All men are created equal. Doesn't mention women. We know they meant women too. And now there's these savages. So right in the beginning, it became clear the ideals were good. We haven't lived into them yet. That's why we've had to amend the Constitution to abolish chattel slavery, to give women the right to have voice in our system. And we continue to work it out. So if you see a flag on stage at Unity of Houston, it's because we believe in the values of equality and justice and individual freedom. But we're not here to say that America is the only nation that God has blessed, or that we are somehow exempt from, you know what I'm saying? Some of the language that you might hear in other churches. So I need you to hear that. What we're trying to do is different. I love what the pastor said, that all nations are great if their values align with love thy neighbor. In the Hebrew tradition, the way that our collective way of being together was really judged of value. It's how do we treat the orphans, the widows, and the stranger? And that is the Jewish tradition. How are we treating the orphans, the widows, and the stranger, those who have no power? There's a movement to put the 10 Commandments in classrooms. I know you know about that. I think they should look at the Beatitudes. If you really want to be Christian, because the 10 Commandments we borrowed from Judaism, right? The law. But go look at the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacemakers. They shall be called the children of God. But we're not going to put, if I had my way, we would not put any one religion's documents in a public place like that. It's not the appropriate place for it. But definitely not in that way. But how are we treating? And Jesus was very clear on this too, spoken many times, is whatever you've done unto the least of these, my brothers, you've done unto me. How are we treating those who have the least amount of power and privilege in our culture? That's the divine, that's the hallmark of whether or not we're living a spiritual quality in our public life. How are we treating those who have least power? The scapegoating that we now see against immigrants and trans people, that's all it is just scapegoating. People have a feeling that something is wrong in my country. They must be the problem. They must be the problem. And leaders will use that to their own power. In this election season, with all the unknown and all the uncertainty, I'm going to invite this church to do what you need to do individually, but let's see how we can align with love thy neighbor. How can we align with oneness, with our name, unity? How can we begin to do that? Oh, I'm talking a lot. I told you there were 3 sermons. I'm almost done, though. Thank you. There's also St. Podcasts, and I get a lot of spiritual wisdom there, too. Krista Tippett has a wonderful podcast. She's also on NPR called On Being, and she had an interview a few weeks ago, but I'm going to get his name right. Luis Alberto Urrea. He's an author and also professor of literary things. What is it called? There's a word there. There's a noun form of that's escaping me in a moment. He is a progressive liberal, born in Mexico to Mexican father, American mother. He said the border not only went down the middle of my family, it went through the middle of our house. There in Tijuana, his mother was in the kitchen. That was America. His father was in the living room. That was Mexico. he went to do some research and do some journalism around the border. He was really worked up about the way, because in his mind, the Mexican people were honorable, and all the people he revered in his early life were Mexican, and now they're being portrayed as being, you know what they're being portrayed as. And so he went there, and he met some of the Border Patrol agents, and he said, I didn't like them, and I didn't want to like them. They were the enemy. But then guess what happened when he got to know some of them? I don't know if you know this, but in the southern border, many of the immigrants die making the crossing because there's not enough water and the heat is unbearable. The Border Patrol constructed on their own dime these towers, and there's a sign there in Spanish and other languages that says, if you push this button or call this number, we will come and we will rescue you. And they do. They arrest them because that's their job. They're police officers. And Luis found out about all these things, and he got to know that these are good men and women trying to do the right thing in a really difficult situation. And at the end of it, he's describing, he's like this one guy who's in South Texas, rancher family, and he's like, man, I hate to say this, but I love you. And the guy said, well, I kind of like you too. That's where the healing occurs. When we begin to see that we're all doing our best to try to address the situations as we can so that we can make a better world for all of us. I've talked about this a lot too. I've never seen it in poetry form, and I'll close with this. From Edwin Markham. Thank you, Penny Beaker, for sending me this. He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. Pray with me now. In this moment, we enter into that circle of God, that circle of love, that circle of all that is. Everything belongs, as Richard Rohr says. All of it is contained within the life of God, and we exclude no one. We recognize that beneath all conditions, there is this energy for life and becoming that is everywhere present. That those innate qualities of spirit, of peace, power, wholeness, joy, abundance, and freedom are rising up around us and within us, awaiting our recognition. And to recognize the good of God that is here, we must release our wrong-mindedness. We must release our false beliefs, our false narratives about who are good and who are bad. We must come back to the truth that God is in all people. God is in us. And we seek to live from that place of love and connection and remembrance. And so I trust as this nation, in its 249th year, we are beginning, we'll begin to live into the values of equality and justice and freedom for all in new ways. And whatever is mine to do or to not do, I trust that the Holy Spirit will guide and correct me. We are here to be the love of God in human form. And in this moment, we say yes. We are available. Move through us. Love through us now, God. And so it is. Amen. Something really amazing is happening here. Thank you. Thank you. If no one has told you today that they love you, I love you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.